For Crema Media's Polity, I'm Sane Dlamini. Dr. Botlhale Tema discusses her book titled Land of My Ancestors. So, Dr. Tema, briefly tell us about the discovery of your family's origin. How did you make the discovery and what was the story of the origin?
This book is based on information I stumbled on while I was working for the UNESCO National Commission. Okay. And they had a project called the Slave Route project. The idea was to implement that project wherever there has been slavery. And when I was told that we in South Africa have to implement it, I thought, no, it goes to Cape Town. And when I was in Cape Town, I spent the night at a historian friend of mine. And I was telling her just how good and important this project is, because it was aimed at starting economic development projects in areas that were affected by slavery. I said, wow, it's so good, I wish I could take it to the Transvaal, where I come from. Then she said, but there was slavery in the Transvaal. I said, what? And she then gave me a book by Fred Morton, and he described what happened after 1836, after the Great Trek, when they came to settle in the hinterland. And they found that they had farms and no labor, and local people in the villages who couldn't understand what it meant to leave your own job and go and work for somebody else. Slavery was abolished, but they decided to do clandestine slavery and abduct young kids from 4 to 10. As long as they were young, they could still mold them and grow in their farms. And then when I was looking through that book, I saw that it was talking about Welgeval. And Welgeval was a farm on which I grew up, more or less. It's where my father comes from, really. And so that is, then I said, wow, what? I connected with slavery. And then I decided to follow up the story and do archives and all sorts of research and interview some of my people.
Where exactly is Welgeval and how were your forefathers dispossessed of their land?
Okay, first of all, to be abducted is to be dispossessed of your home, basically. I found that they grew up on these Boer farms. And when the law was that when they reach a certain stage, they were let go. And they used to call them Nbukeleng, and they would pretend, the Transvaal government would pretend that they were orphans, yes. And then at a certain age, 20, when they were young men now who can fend for themselves, they would let them go, and then they sort of had to start life from scratch. And because they are totally dissociated from their former homes. And they met up with this missionary called Goning, who wanted to start a church in a village in Muruleng, the village next to Welgeval. And the Transvaal government wouldn't allow him. So he was stranded, they were stranded, so they were good partners. And then he finally got the church overseas to buy him a farm, and that was Welgeval. And they joined him to work on his farm and build the farm into something he didn't know anything about farming. And then he left. They allowed him finally to go to the bigger village. He started his first mission on Welgeval, and then they moved him to the bigger village, and then he gave my people their first chance to buy.
So where exactly is Welgeval?
Welgeval was right in the middle of Pilanesberg Game Park. Right in the middle, sort of. Yeah, I think it was in the heart of Pilanesberg. And so that then our people bought, to cut the long story short, and they stayed there until then the Homeland government, Buputazwana, wanted to start the Pilanesberg Game Reserve. And then they were removed now. And that was the dispossession. and then we had to now put in a land claim.
So did it come as a shock for you that you were not exactly from Welgeval, but you were descended of a slave?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because, I mean, if you are wearing your high heels like you are doing, and somebody told you, but actually you are a descendant of a slave, how would that hit you? I mean, like, this is why I wrote the book, and why the book is not full of hate and bitterness. It is not full of that, because that was not my focus. My focus was that if my forebears were slaves, how did they manage to give rise to me? How did they manage to give rise to me? So basically, I feel I wrote the book as an act of love and gratitude for and to say, what can I learn from them? How did they manage to transform, to reinvent themselves so much that I have absolutely no scars from their scars? They didn't pass on their pain. And I managed to grow up emotionally healthy. That is what I was writing about. Yeah.
In the beginning of the book, you tell us about your fond memories growing up and a funny story about a church priest who was reading the Bible upside down. Can you briefly tell us about that story?
The church was like a meeting place. It was spiritual and social at the same time. And because, you know, we didn't live on Welgeval itself. We came weekends. We were commuters. And the characters there were so funny. I mean, like, people, some of them rode horses, and the church had little, instead of benches, they built just what is it? A small wall to sit on, benches, built-in benches, I call them, and like we were told stories, and you know, kids lie to each other, and we were told that actually they can't read, especially that one minister and evangelist, that he always had his book upside down. And but he then would pretend he's reading, in fact, but he had memorized some passages, and then he would say, so me and my cousin wanted to go and check if he's really got it the right way up. And then we were really amused by the story. We got home and told my grandmother, and she wasn't impressed at all, and said, yes, you take things so for granted, because of course we didn't know that there was a hidden sad story at the bottom of all this. And she said, now you take things for granted. And that is what made us curious, because I was going to write the book whether or not we put in the land claim, because we were curious about these people in Welgeval. They were different from people in villages. They, for example, they were known for baking bread. Other people didn't. The things they grew, sweet potatoes and all that type of thing. So we felt there's a story here. Why are we so different? We didn't even have a chief or something. We are just people. Yeah.
So you won the land claim. Tell us, was it an easy task to...
The land claim was not easy. For two reasons, because we nearly lost the farm when you know, there was the 1913 Land Act, which didn't really encourage black people to own farms. And so they wanted the farm to go to the village, that Moruleng. Anyway, again, our people started, because when the missionary died, he had said we can buy without interest. And then when he died, his son said, he introduced interest, and that made our people fight, because they didn't understand, who understand what is interest? And therefore the payment slowed down until they were almost taking it. And then, but the chief of the village, this is where the confusion came, had married one of our people's daughters. Apparently, I'm told they like to marry from that side, because they knew they could speak Afrikaans there, so they would have a home translator. But he was one. They considered the chief as one of us, the son-in-law. So they said, "Can you help us? Here we are stuck. They want to take the farm." And he said, "Okay, I'll get some money to help you." And they helped me, meaning that it's a loan, sort of. That's how they understood it, but the government gave them the title deed.
What were some of the shocking revelations you discovered while you were conducting research for this book?
Well, the revelation was, first of all, that how young the kids were who were abducted. That they were like 4 years of old age, and not anything more than 10. And the second thing was that, I mean, Pietersburg, Muleji and Rustenburg, it's not so far, but the kids were so disoriented. They didn't even know where they came from. I mean, there's somebody who writes about meeting there were these wagons carrying kids from the north downwards. And he said one day he would ask these kids, where's your mother and father? Says, "I don't know." Where do you live? With my master. And have you ever seen your parent? No, I've always lived with my master. So, I mean, and apparently they were quite cruelly treated, especially if they did try to run away.
How would you advise a community that is in the process of land claim?
I think you can go to the archives. They keep information about all sorts of things and places to the National Archives in Pretoria. That's where I got my information. And of course, because we were associated with the Dutch Reformed Church, some information I got through that. The thing is that you need to find out who could have kept information for you. Because the sad part of things is that our people don't keep information. They don't keep files of their records and so on. And that is why our people were stuck. And they were also stuck because, again, like if a community has been moved, the first thing you throw away are papers so that you can pack and move.
And lastly, do you think that the government is doing enough to help families like yours to regain their land?
I think the government should have a mechanism, like, let's say the HSRC, for example, if it could have a research unit for helping communities that are putting in claims to find evidence, and then the evidence would either be, yes, you are correct, this was your land, no, you are wrong, this was not your land. So our family is lucky to have had me who can do the research. But if a family doesn't have that kind of person, I've heard that most people's claims die at the point of producing evidence. Then they just give up because they don't know what to do. If I can just add that, the approach I took to the book, this was not intended to blame. Not that there's nobody to blame, but it was not my intention. Because I was writing this book for my family, for my kids, for our kids, and for them to know who we are, where we came from. And I also wrote it in such a way that how they look at their grandparents, they should not just look at them as victims. They were victimized, but they survived that. That was what I wanted to emphasize, that because somebody, while I was doing these lunches and so on, and reviews like what you're doing, asked me, but why are you not at least calling on the government to do something about that.
Like compensation?
Yeah, or something like that. I fought for the compensation when we were claiming the land, and it looked like the bigger village with which had lawyers was going to take. But my point is that at that point, that is when I was fighting for their rights, my people's rights, and that they can't have suffered 3 times, being taken from their villages, abducted, and then losing the land, and now losing it for the 3rd time. That is not going to happen. But I said to them, I want to see you to look at how these people reinvented themselves, because what they did then was that, first of all, they became very strong farmers. They were farming that land, and secondly, they took on education as an important means of creating a new image for themselves. And so I said, if they could do that under those circumstances, what more? You can't be beaten. I've got it there. You can't be beaten by life. So that is why the attitude is not bitter. My grandparents didn't pass on bitterness to me. They passed on the idea that you are responsible for your destiny.
That was Dr. Tema speaking to Crema Media's Polity about her book titled Land of My Ancestors.